Thank you. Thank you for having me on. Look, this is a very complex and difficult conflict like no other. And external partners have very limited influence in what happens on the ground. I think both these men see an end game, and that's to destroy one another. And until such time the other is completely and fully destroyed, they may give lip service to mediation and ceasefire, but I sincerely doubt that they mean to have a pause. They want to see this thing to the bitter end, which unfortunately is the history of conflict in Sudan. Bashir wanted to see the rebels in Darfur crushed, and both his generals were instrumental in crushing those rebels in Darfur. And today they are back again at each other, and the only solution they seem to know is to crush the opposition. No, we can actually go back a bit farther than 18 months ago. These two generals were, if you will, partners in crime, because they were the two generals who were used by Bashir to subdue the movement, the resistance in Darfur, and then they re-emerged in 2019, as you say, as allies again to depose Bashir. And the West embraced them, unfortunately. Then once they deposed Bashir, they set up this military-led transition and the civilian in the form of Abdullah Hamdok to lead the government, but that did not last. And by 2021, they had another coup jointly that deposed of Abdullah Hamdok, and they took control. Now, the fighting or their mistrust, if you will, has come to a head because these two men mistrust each other, and they are buying for time to see who can outmaneuver the other. And clearly, this is where we're going now, and that's why they are not open to any mediation, but a final and total solution. Yeah, there are external forces that have a vested interest on one side or the other. That's not to say they will influence the warring parties stopping, but at the same time, they are also actively supporting one side or the other. So, as you mentioned, Wagner, the Russian outfit through Libya, is reported to have been supplying arms to General Hemeti, while Egypt, on the other side, is said to be supplying arms and trainers and so on to General Burhan. So what the external partners are doing at best is flaming the conflict and not doing anything to stop it. The US and the Quad, which includes a few Europeans and a few Arab countries, are trying to apply some pressure here. But again, pressure has limited utility, has limited premium, because these men, to them, concluding this war is something that has to be done once and for all, and that seems to be where they're heading.
There's a lot of interested parties concerned about this conflict. Just explain to us, why does what's happening in Sudan matter to so many other countries?
Well, absolutely. I mean, Sudan is geopolitically a very important country, first of all because of geographical location, of course, its proximity to a number of very populous African countries, Egypt and Ethiopia first and foremost, but also just across the Red Sea to Saudi Arabia. And of course, Sudan has very large diasporas in some of those countries in the Middle East and elsewhere in Africa that make it so significant. But secondly, of course, there's also Sudan's very long history of conflict, and the way the conflicts in Sudan tend to spill over into neighboring conflicts. In Ethiopia, we've got a very fragile ceasefire at the moment in the Tigray region in northern Ethiopia. We have major wars, of course, also as well in Egypt and in Chad, as well as in South Sudan. So the stakes in many ways couldn't be higher. And that's in part why so much of the world is so worried about what is happening at the moment in Khartoum and in other parts of Sudan.
So we've had a few false starts with a couple of ceasefires. What could be the realistic end game now for this conflict, at least in the short term? Could it be perhaps the start of Eid will trigger the gunmen to put down their weapons just for a few days, perhaps?
Perhaps, and perhaps symbolically. But the truth is that, realistically speaking, the stakes for both the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, and the Sudan Armed Forces are so high, and their distrust of one another is so great, that any kind of longer-term resolution to this conflict is highly unlikely, unfortunately. Both sides distrust each other so much and really believe that their own survival is essential to the survival of Sudan as a country, that they're unwilling to make those kind of compromises. And that is terribly frustrating for ordinary people in Sudan and for Sudanese people outside the country who are so worried about their friends and family in the country at this time of the end of Ramadan and the celebration of Eid al-Fitr. But the situation is no different, and that is exactly why these mediation efforts keep failing and are likely to continue failing, unfortunately, until one side has a clear upper hand and feels that it can accept these kind of truces. Desperate, unfortunately. It leaves them looking for protection. It leaves them looking for safety, as you've heard in that latest broadcast that you've shared. People are also leaving the capital city, are leaving Khartoum, looking for safety, and the same is happening in other urban centers, in Kordofan, for example, and in Darfur, in the western part of the country. And the United Nations Secretary General has been absolutely unequivocal about this, and the need to protect humanitarian workers, as well as the need to safeguard humanitarian access and humanitarian operations by other foreign countries and by other organizations. But unfortunately, neither General Burhan nor General Hamiti have taken those calls as seriously as they should. And that's, as I said, terribly frustrating. But that's what the situation is. And this is, unfortunately, I should say, a story that we've seen coming and that we've warned about, and unfortunately that is now materializing and that risks spiraling a much broader and longer civil war.